Hello, everyone. Welcome to Babylon's Fall. I'm your host, Greg Mailer. And where we left off last time was right in the middle of verse 4. Um, but if you're new to the channel, what I'm doing here is presenting kind of a different viewpoint on specifically the Johannine literature, John, the three epistles that he wrote, and his revelation. I present a different view that essentially says that these books have led to a departure of truth. And my work aims at showing everyone how that is actually true. And so, without further ado, let's hop right into the next bit of the commentary, why don't we? All right. So, the very first thing I want to say is I'm only going to be talking about "in him was life" right here. The very first phrase. The reason I want to go over that is because in the word was life sounds like it's talking about an intrinsic eternality, especially if you pair it with the first clause in 1:1, which says, "In the beginning was the Word," which sounds very much like an eternality, and this one was very much in the same light as that. In him was life. In the beginning was the Word. And so the Greek word there for life is called zoe. And it's generally just a thing that we know life is, life and death. And so what this is saying is that the word has life within himself. Now, the fact that it had said, and the word was God, however, should have given us a clue of that, shouldn't it have? Of course, we saw that it might have meant divine in the last video, and I had given my thoughts on why that's not an adequate way to read it, since it doesn't really help us define what the word God is. It needs further explanation. However, if you look at the Old Testament, we have tons of references, and I only put 3 here, which show the eternality of God, the everlasting God, everlasting to everlasting. You made the earth, the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Your years have no end. And so the idea of the Old Testament version of God is very much that God is a necessary being that is a starting point for everything else. And so that's what the author here is saying. That's what our manager is saying. In him was life. In the word was life. Now, something Jesus says later on in 5:26, though, we need to carefully examine, because he says, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself." Now, in that comment, it sounds a lot less like intrinsic life and more like dependent. In other words, it sounds more like it's a zoe granted by the Father to the Son. Now, how does that interact with "in him was life," or even John 1:1, which was, "In the beginning was the Word"? How does that play? Well, let's go look at another passage. Later on in John 15:1, Jesus declares, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." And as he continues into that teaching, he calls those that believe his branches here. And those that do not produce fruit, his Father will cut down and throw into the fire, because his Father is the vine dresser. And those that do produce fruit, the Father will prune so that they produce more fruit. Now, why do I bring up this parable or teaching? Because Jesus calls himself the vine, and he calls believers in him the branches, which botanically are the same species of thing. Now, the Father, though, he's the vine dresser. He is a human agent outside of the vine, outside of the branches, who is doing the work at cultivating this vine, this grapevine, if you will. And yet, this is how Jesus defines himself. He calls himself the vine, which is, without the vine, the branches could do nothing. If you kill the vine, the branches die too. However, this shows very much Jesus' view of the Father. He is a different ontological being than himself. Now, there's another verse I would like to look at. And this one's in Revelation, which is traditionally written by the same author. In Revelation 3:14, it says, "These things says the Amen, the faithful, the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God." Now, this last phrase is what we're going to focus on, because what I think that means is he's the first thing created by God. He's the beginning of the creation of God. However, we need to examine it, because I might be off. Maybe it's saying he's the, we need to examine this verse to see what it says. So I do a really strong breakdown of this. So let's look. First thing, the Greek word for beginning there is arche, right here. In the Johannine writings, it happens 19 times. And every single time, we're going to look at them, by the way, every single time, it means the very start or the chronological commencement of a thing. However, other English translations, such as the NIV, say the ruler of God's creation instead of the beginning. The NASB says origin of the creation of God. Now, ruler gives you the connotation that he's the one in charge. Origin gives you the connotation that he is the source of God's creation. Now, ruler, we already know, he's used, the same author in Revelation 1:5 has already used ruler. He says Jesus Christ, the ruler over the kings of the earth. And the word he used for ruler here is archon. It's an entirely different Greek noun. And so had he wanted to say ruler right here, the ruler of the creation of God, he would have used archon, because he'd already used it before. And so this translation here, I don't agree with it at all. I mean, I think that they used the wrong word there. Now, the NASB uses origin, and in the last video, the reason I went over 1 Corinthians 8 is to show this different mindset that Paul had between the one God who's the Father, from whom the origin, are all things, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things. And they're two different Greek words, again showing a demarcation in Paul's mind between who is God and who is the Lord. One is the origin of all things, and one is the lens through all things were made. So if we keep that straight in our mind, it allows us to say that this word origin cannot be right, because the Father is the origin of the creation of God. The Son is not. Therefore, this word here is not correct either. The correct word is the beginning, and I'm going to prove that to you. Let's go look at every case that John uses this word arche. And John, he has it 8 times. In the beginning was the Word. He was in the beginning with God. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. Now, just all these are arche. For Jesus knew from the beginning, ex arches. Now, that is a little bit different than arche, but it's the same root word. So you see arche. The only this S right here is just syntax. That's all that is. It's the same word. It's just syntactically different. If you know Spanish, it's kind of like how they have different endings. Where if you do hablo, it would be like I. Hablamos would be more of a we. It's the same thing, but hablo is the underlying word. In Greek, it's very similar. And so this is the same word. But you would not say, for Jesus knew from the origin who was the thing, who were the ones that did not believe. Beginning is the best word for that in English. And let's go to the next one. Jesus said to them, just what I've been telling you from the beginning. You definitely wouldn't say from the ruler or from the origin. Again, origin has a different connotation than beginning. Okay, 844. It says he was a murderer from the beginning. Parques. Again, this is a different thing here, but arche is the same root word. 1527, because you have been with me from the beginning. 16:4, I did not say these things to you from the beginning. Same word. Let's go to 1 John. That which was from the beginning. Aparches. 2:7. But an old commandment that you had from the beginning. Aparches. 2:13. I am writing you fathers because you know him who is from the beginning. Okay. 2:14. The next verse. Because you know him who is from the beginning. 3:8. For the devil has been sinning from the beginning. 3:11. This message you have heard from the beginning. 2 John. Not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning. John 2:6. This commandment, just as you heard from the beginning. Again, these are all the same word. The last three are in Revelation, and it's the one we just looked at, the beginning, arche, of the creation of God. And there's two other ones, and they involve the beginning and the end right here. The arche, the beginning, on both of those. And so if you go through all 19 occurrences, you see when John uses arche, he means the start. So right here, when it says the beginning of the creation of God, it's the start. It's the commencement of a thing. Jesus is the first thing of God's creation. Now that we see that, why would English translations try to use different words? Why might they try to do that? Why would they want to put ruler there instead of beginning? Why would they want to put origin of the creation of God there? Well, it's probably because they don't want you to see that it means beginning, because that presents textual problems. That presents an idea of a created Christ. And however, if that's what John said there, if that's what he wrote, that's what the Greek says, if that's how he uses the word, I'm sorry. That's what we got to go with. We can't go with our creeds to save us on this one, or using different words to substitute there. But let's say that that's right and I'm correct here. Then what does that leave us with the definite, indefinite, or qualitative points? Well, surely if Jesus has his life granted by the Father from 5:26, John 5:26, his entire life is granted by the Father. We know that the illustration he used of the vine and the vine dresser shows that they're two ontological species, different. And Jesus is the ontological species that we are. He's the vine, we're the branches, whereas the Father is a human agent. And if you extrapolate that out, you can see my point. And then lastly, if he is the first thing God created, then guess what? We also ends up having a contradiction. What ends up being contradicted is John 1:3, where it says, and by him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that was made. You know why it would be a contradiction? It's because there's one thing he didn't make, and that's himself. Okay. And I'm sorry if that's the contradiction that is made, but that's where we are left with the actual Greek, with the actual evidence. And we don't necessarily have to apologize for it all the time. We can actually see that as perhaps part of the problem. Okay, so back to what I was saying. If those things are true, it definitely cannot mean the God, because you can't have a God that relies on another God for life. It can't definitely probably not mean a God either, because then that just makes God be, you don't even know what that means if it's a God. Lastly, qualitative is about the only thing we have left. It's kind of like in the other section. But see, divine, once again, does not really get us anywhere. We need to define what divine is. And if divine includes that you have your life granted to you and you're not the same ontological being as the other, as God, then fine. But we need to define that. And we need to use the terms that John uses to define it. And with that, I will go ahead and end the video. Hope you liked it. Sorry if I fumbled around a lot. But I really do want everyone to learn this and to figure out these puzzle pieces and to realize that just because John's first 3 verses sound so easy, like, sure, Jesus is God, right? But it's not. It's actually a lot more complicated than it looks. And I hope that my videos can help you see that. And as we get into the next one, I hope to see you there. So have a good evening. God bless. Peace out.
Mystery Babylon, the city of sin and depravity. The